when we started doing redistricting, the very first thing we did was kind of a redistricting 101. Then we did talking about independent redistricting commissions, and all of that was much more based on local. And today we're going to be talking about state level redistricting. And in order to do that, we invited the state level the person representing the state, for on the redistricting commission for our area. So for the program today, first we're going to have our state level redistricting commissioner speak. After that, we're going to have Paul Mitchell, who heads Redistricting Partners, which is a consulting group that works on redistricting and works specifically in San Mateo County, among other places. And then we're going to hear from Kalimah Salahuddin, who is the president of Jefferson High School Union Board of Education, and she'll be talking about how it affects us locally. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Russell Lee. He's from Alameda, and a century ago, his ancestors left southern China to come to California. They settled in Oakland, where his parents and his brothers were all born and raised. He graduated from Oakland High School, UC Berkeley, Dallas Theological Seminary, and the Graduate Theological Union, where his research was focused on sociolinguistic aspects of you gave me a lot of hard words here, liturgical and free worship. He taught mostly for Fuller Theological Seminary, and especially enjoys teaching his class in Oakland for St. Mary's College. He has many qualifications. It was not easy to become a redistricting commissioner. I hope you'll talk a little bit maybe about the process for the state. A lot of people applied, and it was a very, very competitive process. Dr. Yee is a longtime history docent at Oakland Museum of California with a special interest in the state's indigenous peoples. He's the first board secretary for Habitat for Humanity in the East Bay. He's an avid marathon runner. He volunteers for Running for a Better Oakland, a youth sports and scholarship program. He lives in Oakland with his wife, sorry about that, Dr. Lisa Yee, who is a physician at a community health center, and he's registered with the Republican Party. The Redistricting Commission, as Dr. Yee will tell you, has a balance of independent, Republicans, and Democrats. So we look forward to his presentation and then to some excellent discussion afterwards. So Dr. Yee, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Petra. Wow, you know so much about me. A pleasure to be with you, and so inspiring to have organizations like you be so involved in your communities, to organize, to be active. Certainly all the census work. We've been talking with a lot of the census staff, and it's just inspiring to hear about all the blood, sweat, and tears, that went into getting the census count as complete as possible. And now the next step, of course, which is redistricting. So I'm in Oakland, as you can see, Alameda County, but all 14 commissioners actually represent the whole state. We're divided up for outreach purposes, but in terms of representation, we all represent the whole state. And by statute, there are 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and then 5 who are neither of those two. As it happened, 4 that are neither of those two. As it happens, those 4 are no party preference, although they could have just as well have been Green or American Independent or anything else. So I've been asked to talk for about 20 minutes and then open it up for questions. So let me fire up my little slideshow. And I'm glad you've already covered your Redistricting 101. Let's see, is that displaying well? Basics, so that we don't have to go through that. Here we go. One thing I have to mention is that in our Q&A, you cannot tell me where you want the line between Congressional District 14 and 18 to be. That kind of input has to come in a publicly agendized, an agendized public meeting, input meeting, which we'll have plenty of later in this process. But during this session, I can't engage with you about actual lines and actual geography and actual districts. So I just wanted to mention that. Here are 14. So Petra asked me to say a little bit about how we were chosen.
You know, I don't think you're on the right screen. Did you want to be on here?
Oh dear. Okay. How do I do this?
We have your slideshow otherwise.
Okay, so you're seeing the slideshow?
No, I'm not seeing it, but we have it if you want us to do it.
I think you have the full one, which we don't have time for today. So
Okay.
let me see if I can fix this. Oh dear. Okay, so share screen, slideshow, share. How's that?
That's right.
Are you seeing the show?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So here's the 14. And we were initially part of a pool of 20,000 applicants, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually fewer than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there were 30,000, a little bit less interest this time. And basically any registered voter can apply. It was an almost year-long process. It's like being on Survivor for a year, about 7 different stages. You write your application essays, you get letters of recommendation, you submit a Form 700, which some of you are probably familiar with. That's the financial disclosures, which was a new experience for me. Eventually, you get down to a pool of about 120 to get interviewed. And this whole selection process is being conducted by the California State Auditor's Office. Out of the 120, you get 60 that get recommended to the legislature. The legislature can strike up to 36 of those for any or no reason. It's like a voir dire in a jury selection process. That's the one and only stage in which the legislature has any role at all in this process, which is quite remarkable, I think. Of the remaining 36, actually we had one drop out late in the process. Of the remaining 35, it then goes to a lottery, and they use the same equipment as the state lottery, the little ping pong ball cage and the ping pong balls with the numbers on them. And you have a separate lottery for the first 3 Democrats, first 3 Republicans, and first 2 no party preference. So it'd be the first 8. I was not part of the first 8. Those 8, they meet and they select the final 6, and I was part of the final 6. So we talk about the lucky and the chosen. And so we have our final 14. And so we've been meeting since last August. And a lot of the work, this is only done every 10 years, right? And it's only been done once before. So a lot of the work is just getting started, hiring the whole staff, getting an executive director, getting a bunch of policies in place, making plans. This time around, we'll actually have about twice as much time overall as the last commission did. And of course, we've had delays to the census. So the whole process is being stretched out. And with that time, we're doing a lot of outreach and education that the 2010 commission was not able to do. So the goal, of course, is to draw maps. Now we're responsible for 4 maps: Congressional, State Senate, State Assembly, and Board of Equalization. Congressional is going to be dramatic this year because, as you probably know, California is expected to lose 1 or 2 seats for the first time in history. That will happen to California, and that will shake things up across the map. State Assembly and the congressional maps, those are the ones that probably affect you on the county level the most, because that's where there's a big line that goes right through your county. State Senate is a much bigger district, of course, about 1 million people. And then Board of Equalization, even bigger, about 10 million people. Let me give you a look at the timeline we're anticipating. So right now, we're in this first stage of educational presentations across the state. Again, something that the first commission did not have time to do, but we do. One of the reasons I joined the commission was I wanted to go on these fun trips all over the state doing presentations. And instead, of course, we get to do Zoom presentations all over the state, which is all good. At some point, we probably will be able to go out in person, hopefully before too long. Then starting in the summer, we'll start getting public input meetings. And that's when we actually take testimony about where people think lines should be drawn. We're going to be talking a lot about communities of interest, COI. It's probably the trickiest of the criteria that we have for redistricting. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Sometime in August, the census data will finally drop, about 6 months late. And it's even getting trickier because the census has now announced that they're going to release the data first in a legacy format before the final release in a full format. And so this has introduced more variables for us in terms of our timeline. And it's almost a case of wait and see, because that deadline, that timeline for the census has changed several times already. And, so much depends on that. So hopefully the data will drop. The data has to be formatted as well as adjusted. And we have a statewide database based at UC Berkeley to do that work. In particular, we have something called prisoner reallocation. And that's where the state prison population is reassigned away from the places of incarceration to their last known address. This is new. First time this will be done this time around, and statewide database will be in charge of that. There's the related question of what to do with people who are in federal prisons in California, who may or may not be Californians. And actually right now we're in the middle of discussions about what to do about them. Should we nevertheless count them in their places of incarceration, since we've been told we cannot get their residency data of the last known address, or what should we do? So we're in the middle of that discussion. So when that data is finally all adjusted for us, then we start to actually do the redistricting. So October through December, more input meetings, actually getting draft maps out, getting comment on them, releasing the draft map, the official draft maps right in time for the holidays. Oh boy. Continuing to get input, and then finally getting the maps done. It looks like right now sometime between December 30th and January 15th, if I had to guess. We're now getting, these delays mean we're getting right up against election administration deadlines, for candidate filing and all that. So there's discussion right now about the primary election next year, the dates for that, and whether they'll need to be adjusted and so forth. So that all remains a moving target that we'll have to work with. Okay, by statute, the 6 criteria that we're required to follow, and these are ranked criteria. Equal population, of course, first, Voting Rights Act compliance, contiguity. Number 4, communities of interest. That's the trickiest one. Number 5, geographically compact. That doesn't mean that the shapes have to be pretty, but it does mean you can't skip around one area of population to get to another area of population, basically. And then nesting where possible, to have each state Senate district include 2 whole state assembly districts. But that's number 6. So that's the one that's usually violated the most. So number 4, communities of interest. So, what is a community of interest? Well, it's people that share some kind of aspect of their lives, a transportation corridor, an industry, other aspects of the economy, geography, of course, existing political boundaries, whatever it is. And we want to get testimony from people about those communities of interest, have them describe them to us. They could overlap, of course, with VRA considerations. Exactly how that testimony is made and how we consider it will be something we'll have to navigate. But just hearing from people and all different people what they consider their communities of interest to be. To make this process easier, we have different ways to get that testimony to us. People, of course, can call in when we have the public input sessions. They can submit written testimony. You can draw a map on the back of a napkin and send it to us, and our data people will translate that into something that we can analyze and consider. There can be, that testimony can speak to community issues, matters of transportation or water or school districts or, whatever people consider important for us to consider. And of course, that people are welcome to create maps of their communities or even of proposed districts. So describe your community, draw it on a map if possible, although not required, and send it to us. And I'll give that input. We have something called the COI tool, which is at the Community of Interest tool, which is right there at drawmycacommunity.org. And that's an online mapping tool, very easy to use. And you can draw your community of interest and give us a description of it and tell us why it should be kept together. And just click a button and send it in, and we'll get that input. So just to recap those various ways of getting us input, the COI tool, our main website, which is wedrawthelinesca.org, has a link to the COI tool. You can email things to us, you can phone in, or you can, of course, snail mail things to us. We are very mindful of the multilingual nature of California. Our main materials we are having translated into 12 languages. And we have some budget available as well for translating things that come in non-English languages. So we certainly encourage and want to provide for input regardless of people's languages. And just a reminder once more, I'm not taking public input today, but happy to engage your questions otherwise. And so there's our main address, office in Sacramento. Right there on Capitol Mall. But of course, most commission meetings are happening virtually presently. And at the website there, you can find our meeting agendas and all these materials, public comments, everything is public. Okay, so let's stop screen share and happy to respond to any of your questions.
I'm going to start. If anybody else has questions, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat. But can you talk a little bit more about what the public input sessions will look like, how we find out about them, who makes them happen?
Sure. We have a whole outreach staff, and they are actively seeking out settings and thinking about covering the whole state. The 2010 Commission had 34 public input meetings across the state. Those were actually all 100% in person, which was amazing. All 14 commissioners went to all 34 of those. We'll have something along those lines. They'll probably be hybrid, since we're all getting used to Zoom and even seeing some advantages to them. But they will be agendized, publicly announced, publicly advertised sessions where people can call in or show up in person or show up in Zoom. And, we'll probably have certain geographical areas under consideration at each meeting. And it's just like going to your city council meeting, get in line and give your input, and we take that all in. So we're actively seeking settings for those, as well as there are people asking, to host settings as well. So it can either be our initiative or somebody else's initiative.
And is the only way is the main time to give public comment during a meeting, or are there ways to give public comment not during a meeting?
You can give public comment anytime. Right now you could click on that COI tool mapping tool and give public comment right now about your community of interest. When we get to different, geographical areas, that's when our focus will be on those areas. But we'll be employing a data management team. And when we get to San Mateo County, that team will we'll call up all the public input we've gotten to date on San Mateo County. And we'll have that, in front of us during those meetings. We may even have like a heat map of, where people have commented about what areas of your county, and make that part of the conversation. So definitely not only during that meeting, you can give public input anytime. And after the meeting as well, anytime up to when we turn the maps in, right?
So have we put ourselves on this outreach list by reaching out to you in the first place? So we'll get email notifications?
Absolutely, yes. You probably should have gotten our April newsletter already, maybe.
Oh, yes. Actually, we have.
Okay.
Now that you
You're on.
mentioned it, we are actually already getting emails about when you are doing events. So for everyone who's on this call, Thrive has on our website, there's under special initiatives, there's a whole page about redistricting, and we will make sure that we have all of these links there. We'll also share the slides and the recording of this event on that page as well as by email. Does anybody have any questions? So, Pam, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I put it in the chat so I wouldn't have to do that. Did I hear you say that you want to have two districts in each county?
Well, in California, we have 80 assembly districts and 40 state Senate districts. So, in an ideal world, each state Senate district would have 2 assembly districts and it would all be tidy and neat. But of course, since that's the last ranked criterion, it often gets pushed around by the other criteria. So that's how that comes into play. It's kind of great. I mean, if you were going to design California from scratch, the Constitution from scratch today, you probably wouldn't have 40 Senate districts of 1 million people each. I mean, it's kind of a legacy situation that we work with. But
thank you.
Here we are.
Do you have a sense at all if things are going to be changing a lot do you have any previews of what the census numbers look like? And there's going to be a lot of, we know that we're going to have fewer congressional districts, but is there going to be a lot of movement within the state Senate and the Assembly?
Great question. Actually, on April 27th, coming up, we're going to have our first report, a kind of official demographic report presented, and there's something called the Public Policy PPIC, Public Policy Public Policy Institute of California. They'll be presenting a demographic report based on the American Community Survey data, not the census data yet, since that's not been released yet, but the ACS data, giving an overview of trends in population in California. When we'll find things out, like here in Alameda County, the growth has been eastward, right? Out of the Inner Bay Area and out towards, Antioch, Tracy, places like that. It's also true for Los Angeles County and so forth. So other developments, of course, the areas that were tragically affected by fire, there was a lot of movement of people up there. California has not shrunk, by the way. We have grown. We just haven't grown as quickly as some of the other states. And that's why, with reapportionment, that's why we'll probably be losing 1 or maybe even 2 seats.
Thank you. Diane, do you want to take yourself off mute?
Sure. Hi. I had a question. I was surprised during your presentation that the trust was the 4th criteria, because I had been on some other presentations where it was more highly ranked.
Communities of interest?
Yes.
Sure. Well, the first 3, Equal Population, Voting Rights Act compliance, and contiguity, those are federal requirements.
Oh, okay.
So the others come to us through the state constitution. So that's why they're ranked that way.
Okay, that could be, that makes sense, because the way it was presented previously is like we got like the federal requirements and then we got the state.
Oh,
and
sure.
So the communities of interest was like the 2nd criteria from the state standpoint.
Right.
Second question I have is, we know that there was some undercounting done for the census, especially in communities of color.
Mhm.
Does the redistricting commission have any flexibility in terms of how they deal with that undercount?
Unfortunately, no. We have to use the census data as we receive it. So we can certainly make, we can comment on it. We can make notes in our reports, but we can't adjust the numbers that we're given.
Okay, thank you.
Getting back to the VRA, by the way, that, it is in the news, right? HR 1, which has passed the House, but not the Senate, as well as last year's HR 4, involved all these matters. As you know, the Shelby decision and the deactivation of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. That was a change from the last commission to this commission. This commission is actually not bound. It does not have to seek pre-clearance the way the 2010 commission did for changes to identified districts, which include 4 counties in California that the 2010 commission had to receive pre-clearance for. Now that that's been deactivated, we actually don't have to. Doesn't mean we can't. And the commission is actually discussing right now whether or not to go ahead and basically act as if, Section 5 were still active and go ahead and proceed that way. But that's all in the news, in the courts right now.
Anyone else have any questions for Commissioner Yee? Okay, thank you so much. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the event if you're interested in having a little more local discussion. But we really appreciate you coming and taking the time, and we anticipate that we'll be seeing you again.
Thank you so much for your time and interest. It's a pleasure and an honor to serve you. And unfortunately, I do have to scoot, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I now want to introduce Paul Mitchell from Redistricting Partners. So Redistricting Partners has been working for the last 10 years on redistricting, racially polarized voting analysis, California Voting Rights Act, which we just referenced, the implementation and mid-decade redistricting work, particularly in California for the past decade with GIS and political experience as well. I want to mention specifically that he's working in Burlingame right now, among others, and hopefully we can touch on that a bit. And it's terrific that we can have Paul here to talk about kind of what's really going on locally and how we can get involved the best, since he has had experience in how this all works in the past locally. So we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you, Paul, and hopefully we can have a good question and answer session with you as well. Sorry, I muted you.
There we go. That better? All righty. Thanks for having me. I'm definitely, let me get this slideshow going. You can see that, I presume? I am going to be working in San Mateo doing some redistricting. The 2 clients that we're working with right now are Burlingame and Redwood City. And I'm sure there'll be more in the region. We've done some redistricting for special districts in San Mateo County in the past as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the same kind of stuff that Commissioner Yee went through. But, my viewpoint has been from more of the practitioner, the line drawer, working with agencies, and also at times working on the outside of the process, working to advocate and working with groups to try to make sure that their voice can be heard in redistricting. So we have a role in kind of both pieces. I've just never been a commissioner. I've never actually been on a city council drawing their lines, but other than that, I've played different roles around the redistricting process. And when we talk about redistricting, there's also districting, which is often the conversion from at-large election systems to districts, which San Mateo in particular has gone through a lot of all the way from the county supervisors down to water districts, harbor district, other agencies. So the important thing when we talk about redistricting is the public input. And that's really what I want to focus on here. And oftentimes when we communicate with agencies or groups, the first question they come up with is like, okay, do I have to wait for all the data to come in? Commissioner Yee talked about census data being delayed. Then he talked about mapping. And you're kind of like, well, what do we have to do? Like, what is our role? What is the most appropriate time for us to get engaged? And we should think about public engagement in this redistricting process as 3 different phases. The first phase is from right now until we actually get the data released from the census. That might come mid-August in what they're calling the legacy files, or it might come a little bit later in the official redistricting files. But sometime in the fall, we'll actually get the data. But what can we do between now and then? Right now, between now and then is a time for us to talk about communities of interest and to do some work to identify those. After the data is released, but before the agency can start drawing lines, is kind of a second window of time for the community to engage. The state law is actually really interesting in this part because when the data comes out, neither the state commission nor your county or your cities can actually start redistricting with that right away. There's essentially a 21-day waiting period before they can release draft maps. And what that means is it's like the firing gun is fired and all the community groups, all the members of the public can start running, but the agencies themselves have to just stay there. It allows for you and organizations you might be engaged with to start having meaningful input in the redistricting process. And so that your draft maps and your community of interest and your input can precede any actual public draft map. So that's an important part of the process that's been built in California. And the third part is after an agency drafts lines. The law on this requires a lot more transparency in this process. When an agency drafts their draft plan, they have to have it up on a website public for 7 days before they can actually discuss it. So there's none of this like somebody walking into a board meeting and saying, hey, my cousin John drew this map up and I want to pass it. And 15 minutes later, they pass some plan the public's never seen. This, after the draft lines have been processed, this period of a 7-day period before any public meeting to discuss them is a way for the public to engage, suggest changes, suggest alternate plans. So when I talked about that first kind of what you can do now, the term of art that keeps being brought up is this idea of a community of interest. And the commissioner discussed a little bit about what this is, and he talked about, you know, geography or kind of shared workforces and things, but I'm going to dive into a little bit about how to define your community of interest. The 3 elements that go into what a community of interest are first off, shared characteristics. Secondly, that they can be defined geographically, like you can actually show where they are on a map. And the third, and this is really important, is the relationship to the agency being redistricted. So I'll give some examples of what is and what isn't some of these communities of interest. So my mom's left-handed, and she has a community of people who are left-handed and are always fighting for the armrest, and they want the scissors one way and they have the funny can opener, but they can't be really geographically defined, right? And there isn't like the left-handed, you know, county council or something. So it is a community, but it's not a community that could really fit into a redistricting context. But let's say you have people who live in a foothill area and they have water runoff issues, they've got environmental issues, they have fire issues, they have the issues with the bears coming out of the woods, which is literally something that one group sent into the Redistricting Commission lately. That is a set of shared characteristics. It can be mapped, and it might involve local agencies. So if I was doing a redistricting for local fire district, which they do actually have to redistrict many of those, the foothill area would have a specific issue with regards to fire trucks being able to get up there, access to services, you know, all of these things that would be different than the interests of other people who live in other parts of town. So we want to have redistricting community of interest testimony that kind of checks these 3 boxes. So the goal of the community of interest testimony is to keep different communities together. The Commissioner Yee started talking about them as koi, kind of like the fish in a pond. But koi is, the idea is to keep these together to allow them to maximize their voting power. Now, every once in a while, you'll hear somebody say, hey, my little community of Montrose that lives up above where I grew up, my little community of Montrose, we want to have that in 2 council districts, because then there'll be 2 council members that can both care about Montrose. Or you could see it the other way. We want the entirety of Montrose and everybody who benefits from what's in Montrose to be in one district, so that we have a council member who will actually really care about Montrose, not just in a ceremonial way, but they'll care about it because it's a big part of their district. And the law has skewed towards that second interpretation of what we should be doing with communities of interest. It's that we should be maximizing their strength within individual districts rather than dividing them amongst multiple districts. And there's ways to define these communities of interest that were touched on by the commissioner. And I'm going to show a couple examples of these. The one is literally going on and filling out a form. You can, while I'm giving this presentation, you can open up in a second window and go to the Burlingame City Council website, and they have a section for their districting, and you can fill out a form to say what your community of interest is in Burlingame. And it asks a lot of these questions about where is it, you know, who are you, and how does it relate to what the city is doing. So that is something that you'll see popping up on a lot of agencies. They have it at the state level, but a lot of agencies to do local redistricting. Online mapping. That's another way that you can engage with this process. Literally going in and drawing maps on a website. Most agencies are getting these things started up, and you'll start to see them coming up in your local governments, at your county level. And like was discussed, Commissioner Yee mentioned they have one at the state level already. So you can go on the drawmycommunity.org and, or drawmyca community, I typed it wrong. And you can actually just start drawing an area, name it, save it, tell the commission what it is that that community means to you, and submit it as testimony. And there's more and more of these programs that are available too. A lot of nonprofits, social justice communities, they're out right now helping develop these mapping tools so that you and groups can go out and draw maps, see what different maps would mean, and submit those to public agencies. And even if your local agency doesn't have their own public mapping tool, you can go onto one of these tools, draw something, and just send it to your local fire district or water district or hospital district or whatever agency that you want to make sure that you're heard in during their redistricting process. One of the most traditional ways to involve yourself in the redistricting is participating in public hearings. Right now, most of them are virtual, almost all of them are virtual, and they will probably stay virtual or hybrid, you know, half virtual, half in person throughout the course of the districting process. So engaging in this part of the process is really important because it helps answer that why when you're talking about a community of interest. Not just here it is on a map, but why does that community need to be kept together, and how is it impacted by the agency that's being redistricted? And redistricting is being done right now by all 58 counties, hundreds of cities, school boards, community college districts, water districts, all other kinds of agencies. And the culture around this process has really been just transformed as a result largely of the success of the 2011 State Redistricting Commission and some earlier successes in redistricting commissions like in San Diego. But they are proliferating, and you'll see them popping up more and more. These open redistricting processes, sometimes committees or commissions that allow for additional public engagement. There's also more organizational involvement happening than ever before. There's groups like Common Cause, League of Women Voters, but then also other groups that are specific to the redistricting process that are starting to get involved and you can work with them on trying to make sure that local redistricting can really connect back to the residents and actually be meaningful this cycle. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I can answer questions that are your technical nerdy question. I can go back and talk about something about communities of interest some more. I'm obviously happy to talk about Voting Rights Act or any of those issues. I am more of a demographer. I'm not an attorney. So if there's a legal question, I will couch it in my non-legal terms. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Anybody have any? I, of course, do.
Oh, great. I'm expecting John Baker to have a question. He has to think of something.
We'll give him a minute to think of something. I'd like to hear a little bit about the different kinds of commissions the local cities are using. Because we did do a little bit of a training around independent redistricting commissions versus hybrid and advisory, and our County Board of Supervisors chose to do an advisory. We were trying to push them to do an independent, and they decided against that. What do you see kind of on a more local level as far as what kind of commissions are being used and what effect that has?
Yeah, so I'm definitely a big fan of commissions. I think that the commissions do a great job of taking the power outside of the agency and allowing for a better process. And I hope that as we go into next round of redistricting, we'll see more and more of these. We are seeing some agencies, I can speak to agencies that I'm working with, that are utilizing the commission process. Berkeley, Oakland, Long Beach, San Jose, they've all set up either commissions or committees. We have some others that are setting them up right now. And the challenge with setting them up right now is literally just how are you going to recruit enough people? How are you going to make sure that the group that you get and select is diverse? How are you going to make sure they can all get trained? And, you know, really ensuring that it's a good, healthy process. So that's one of the issues right now is as agencies look to potentially doing a commission or a advisory committee is making sure that they can actually get one together that's really going to be high quality. So the differences in the functions are that an independent redistricting commission under state law is both independent in terms of their authority to actually pass the lines, and they're independent in terms of the methodology used to select them. They're not like appointed by the members of the council or the school board or whatever. An advisory committee is another option that agencies can use. And an advisory committee simply has hearings, they take input, they can draft maps, and they can recommend maps to the local agency. These are generally non-binding maps, and the state law essentially for cities and counties says that they need to have 5 hearings, 4 outreach hearings, and then generally 1 hearing to actually pass the plans. If they have an advisory committee, that can basically only count for 2 of those hearings. They still have to have hearings of their agency after the advisory committee does its work. So ultimately, the advisory committee process doesn't take away from the agency the responsibility to ultimately pass the plans. There is a hybrid approach, and I've never seen anybody do it, but it'll be fun to watch if somebody does, where you have an advisory committee, and that advisory committee, I believe it is that they can produce 2 plans, give it to the city council or county or school board, and they have to pick one of them. I haven't seen anybody go that route, but I'm sure it'll be fun when somebody does. The kicker on all of this, especially for cities and counties, everybody has to do redistricting if they're in a districted election system. There's no way to get out of the responsibility of doing that. However, at the city and county level, there's this rule in the Fair Maps Act that if you don't complete the process by the deadline, which is right now, December 15th, then any member of the public can walk into a court and have the jurisdiction taken away from that agency. So now all of a sudden, that city no longer gets to draw their own lines and a court will do it for them. That kind of hammer in the process is something that I do expect will be used somewhere in the state. There's so many cities and counties. And somebody is going to get into a position where they just can't get the vote. It's December 15th. They have their last hearing. They can't get the votes to pass their plan, and a court ends up doing it for them. So we'll see how that plays out. So that's essentially the process of that. I'm happy to answer any questions on it. I feel like if somebody came to me right now and said, hey, our city wants to do an independent redistricting commission, I would say, great. Why didn't you decide that 6 months ago? Like when you actually had more time to do the outreach and get the process started and done right. I do see some doing advisory committees, and I think that that's probably a good process to go into right now, given the limited amount of time we have left.
So I just want to clarify what our Board of Supervisors is doing, because they kind of took a half and half approach, which is they chose to do an advisory commission, but they're using the League of Women Voters to make the selection of the advisors. So they will be chosen independently.
That's great. That's great.
So, David has a question.
Hi, thank you, Petra. Thank you, Paul. Very helpful. A question, sort of two-part question. There's two school districts that one has already moved to district elections, and it sounds like the process for adjusting boundaries is going to kick in with the new census data. And then there's another school district which is starting to look, maybe in your mind, a little bit late to consider moving to district elections in the area. Is there anything to keep in mind for the school district as it's starting down the path that then gets locked and loaded in the redistricting process? Because it sounds like I'm talking specifically Sequoia High School Union high school district has already gone through the process. San Mateo Union High School District is looking at moving to district elections. Is there a mechanism that gets locked and loaded, or are there different options of different potential processes that get locked and loaded as they go to the next stage of redistricting?
Yeah, so we're in a weird time frame where after the 20 election, or actually more like after about August of 2020, it was too late for most agencies to be able to do redistricting or do a conversion from at-large to district elections and have it actually take effect in 2020. And if they did a redistricting, they would be doing a conversion under the California Voting Rights Act. They would essentially be drawing lines and then still have to do a redistricting before the 2022 election. So there would be lines that would never have actual elections under them. There's a water district, San Juan Unified or San Juan Water District in the Sacramento area that did this. They went through all the trouble based on a lawsuit to convert under the California Voting Rights Act to district election system. I think they passed their plans around November, December of 2020, so after the election. And what they passed was a zombie plan. The zombie plan is a set of districted lines based on the 2010 data that they're going to have to do an actual redistricting in this year before those lines can be used for 2022. So because of that weird issue of why do you want to have an agency go through all this work when you know you're just going to have to redo it, the state law and the governor's executive orders have allowed agencies that are under a CVRA claim to do the districting once the new census data comes out. So to delay and have different timeframes to make sure that they can do that conversion from at-large to districted once they have the ability to use the new data, which would be in the fall of this year, and allowing them to kind of use that same process. So they're not having to do a conversion to district elections, come up with a bunch of lines, and then just have to redo them 3 months later. So once they've done these lines, whether it's a city, a county, a school board, or anything, those lines will take hold and be used throughout all the elections until 2030. And every one of those agencies will have to redo their redistricting in 2031.
Pam?
Yes, thank you. I have a comment, and that is, I live in a city in which we're affected by, I want to say 9 different bodies that will be doing redistricting jurisdictions. And so when I discovered that, I started letting people know. And it just seemed to me that if all of these jurisdictions really wanted to have robust participation, they would have started announcing to their residents that they're going to be doing redistricting and why they're doing it. They would site so that residents could go to it and see what's going on. So that's my plug. But my question is the December 15th deadline for jurisdictions that are having elections in November of 2022?
June of 2022.
It's
Yeah.
June?
Yeah, so 2 things I'll mention real quick. First off, in Napa, we're working with the county registrar, and we have a contract in Napa where we're doing the county redistricting, the city redistricting, the county office of education redistricting, and the community college board redistricting, all of those together. And what that's allowing us to do is have one centralized mapping site so that people can go and draw lines for all those agencies from one website. And it is allowing this coordination that can happen when you're having, like you mentioned, all these overlapping jurisdictions and somebody wants to be involved. And so this would be like a kind of one-stop shopping for drawing those district boundaries. The other thing that agencies have talked about doing that I've actually discouraged is they'll say, well, we all have to do redistricting. Let's just all have our hearings together. But the challenge with that is that each agency's community of interest is really different. So I might have a community of interest, like I mentioned, that foothills area, and that might be important in the fire redistricting or something like that, but it might not be important in the school district redistricting because, whether or not you live at a little bit higher elevation than somebody else doesn't really matter when you're talking about getting to school, probably. Our experience in the region, we've seen redistrictings where we had a redistricting where we were mapping almond growers and walnut growers, because in a water district redistricting, the water needs of those agricultural areas was different than the water needs of an urban area. We had a redistricting where we were hearing from fishermen, and that was the San Mateo Harbor District redistricting. If somebody showed up in a school board redistricting and said, I'm a fisherman, they'd kind of get laughed at. So it's important for agencies to have their own redistricting, even though that can be less efficient. But it is great if agencies can work together, especially when they're kind of on top of each other, to share some resources with regards to like public mapping tools, or at least having somewhere where residents of the county can go and see all of their different redistrictings that are happening in their area.
Paul, I know you have a hard stop in 3 minutes. Does anybody else have a question?
I have to be on with different commissioners in 3 minutes.
I have one, Petra.
Okay, be quick.
Paul, what do you think? I know I've heard that if the census data continues to be delayed, that it could cause a rescheduling of the June primary. What do you think the chances of that are, and what's kind of the skinny on that?
I'm someone who kind of thinks that we're more likely to move the June primary, but probably only by about 3 weeks. So if I was betting, I'd probably say we have the June primary around June 28th. We can't have it much further back than that because it starts to compress the period between the June primary and the November general. And we want to protect voters' ballots to make sure that they all get counted. And we also want to make sure that the election can be held with people getting their ballots for the November election early, especially the military overseas ballots. And, there's just too many complications. Also in that period between the primary and the general, a lot of these agencies that are only having November elections, that's when they're sending in their redistricted boundaries. That's when the counties are having to manage a process of realigning those precincts. And so that is that's a challenge for sure. And I did see one other hand up. If we want to address that, I can try and squeeze it in.
Aaron Grove, and it's a quick one. For Menlo Park City, where I live, we won't have a primary for our city council elections. So is it too late, in your opinion, for us to have an independent redistricting commission?
Agencies that don't have a primary have a little bit more on-ramp. I think that's definitely true, more so than agencies that do have primaries. With that additional on-ramp, if you had a city that was aggressive about maybe utilizing some of the kind of best practices that have been used in other cities, I'm looking at like Long Beach and Oakland and Berkeley as great examples that we've worked with, then I think they could be effective at still making sure that they get quality applicants and a diverse set of commissioners. So I'd say they're in a better position than, say, a county, and I'm not speaking specifically of San Mateo, but other counties that we've talked to that have primaries. Then for them, it's a little bit more compressed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate you being here. We know you have to run, but this was great. We really
Thank you very much.
did it, and we'll see you again.
Okay, thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, and our last, we're definitely going to have time for conversation at the end, but I wanted to give this opportunity to Kalimah Salahuddin, who is, in addition to being president of Jefferson Union High School District Board of Education, which I did already mention, she's also part of the REACH Coalition and generally just very involved in a lot of what's going on in San Mateo County. So I'm excited that she's here to share her perspective on all of this. So thanks for being here.
No problem. I'm just the immediate past president.
Oh, sorry.
I would very happily go that role. And I'm just still on the board though. Hi, everybody. I'm Kalimah Salahuddin, as she said. And also just want to say thank you everyone for being here to talk about redistricting. That it's so nice to see so much civic engagement. And this is why I like being part of this county. I think Petra asked me to be here mostly because at the last meeting, I really spoke up about my current situation here in Daly City and how the district lines kind of affect me currently. I don't understand why Daly City, being the largest city in San Mateo County, is not inside the county lines when it comes to our state representation. And this also includes parts of South San Francisco as well. We share an assembly and state senator with San Francisco, and that is extremely challenging. Just for advocacy in terms of running for office, I don't see how anyone from Daly City could win one of those seats just because you're just outvoted. How do you get to know someone or campaign in a city and really a different county, which is completely different and has entirely different issues than what we're dealing with here. So an example of that is I have been in a meeting with my assembly member, and my district was there with a member of San Francisco Unified, and we couldn't really advocate for ourselves. Instead, we were just used as a tool for the assembly member to talk about everything he didn't like about San Francisco Unified. So, and that is a continued ongoing process that's happened again with the reopening, that we really felt we were used as tools in order to make their point with San Francisco Unified, but not really advocating for our unique needs that we have here in this city. So it's really hard being a neighbor and when we're next door and being in the same district with such a juggernaut that San Francisco is. Anytime I hear them speak, it's very rare that they say they represent San Mateo. They usually say representative of San Francisco. And sometimes they're even in Daly City. And so I'm like, and don't forget San Mateo County. I've also tried to run for as a delegate for the state party, and that's extremely challenging here, competing against San Francisco. So you really have to be on a slate with San Franciscans so that they can help you with those votes. They hold the elections when we're holding in-person elections, they hold them in Daly City. So San Franciscans have to come to Daly City, and that's the only way I have an opportunity to win. but San Franciscans right now are advocating to move all those elections back into San Francisco when we can go in person again. And if that happens, I think it'll be impossible for anyone from Daly City to win. And 4 years ago, no one from Daly City made it as a delegate, even though I ran really hard, and so did many other people. We had to be appointed. The next year, I was able to get on a slate and I was able to win. And then this year, even being on the slate, I still wasn't able to win. And out of all this, the seats for delegate, Daly City only has one representative going to the Democratic Party as a delegate. Again, we're the largest city in San Mateo County, and we only have one delegate. And when you look at other cities that are much smaller than I, they may have one or two, just because they're in a different assembly district. So. And then I also want to look at it as a city of color. We're a city of color, and I feel like our voices are being muted by being put in this other district. So I'm hoping that there's something that we can do. I know that it's very tricky to draw these lines, but I'm still really want to advocate for having people who actually know us and live in San Mateo County represent us, and whatever we can do to push that agenda forward.
Thank you. I just want to say that I did a little bit of digging, and I should have brought the article. I can't find it, but apparently there was a lot of conversation around that last time around, like where Daly City should be. And it was some kind of a compromise about not splitting up Daly City, because it's all a numbers game, and then the communities of interest. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens this time with the numbers, to see if we can figure out a way to kind of get, to be able to keep Daly City both together with itself and together within the county. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective, because I think those are the kinds of things that we're going to be needing to think about. Not just, that's kind of on the state level. And, if Daly City ends up being in San Mateo, Daly City, as you said, is one of the biggest cities in the county. So that's going to change our numbers, and that might push other things further down south. So it's also something to think about, like what are going to be the repercussions of that? And, what do things look like further down the line? So lots of interesting things are going to come, and it's going to be super frustrating to be thinking about this and not having the census data, because we're not going to be able to really figure out things. But as the commissioner said, we can go ahead and start now and say, hey, Daly City is a community of interest. Please pay attention to that.
And then the other piece of this is, I know the census was brought up, and we know that people of color in this county were vastly underrepresented in the census. So again, when we're looking at the individual boundaries that have been drawn in the county, lower than the state races, but in the county races, I know that lots of things are waiting for the census data, but I'm also hoping that people really take into account that many communities of color who were hard hit during COVID could not participate in that. So really thinking about voice and representation and looking who represents us right now predominantly doesn't look like the makeup of the county. So how can we use the redistricting to ensure that the representation and leadership of the county actually reflects the makeup of the county?
And just for people who don't know, that most of the Board of Supervisors is terming out. Everyone except for Supervisor Canepa, who does represent Daly City there. But even for the Board of Supervisors, if you're looking at North County, there's definitely places that are split where those lines might be. We might want to think about redrawing those as well. So the League of Women Voters, and someone is on here from the League of Women Voters, but they are working with the Board of Supervisors now to select people for the advisory committee. It is just an advisory committee, but it is an advisory committee, so they will have to do all of the outreach. And like I said, if you guys are here today, you are on my redistricting mailing list, and so you will get information when those outreach hearings happen. Diane?
Yeah, so question, Kalimah. So have you put together, or are you planning on putting together comments to send to the state commission?
Yes,
And
I'm
how are you
hoping-
going about doing that? I'm just curious as to what kind of information you're pulling together, or, you know, what organizations you're talking to get your data.
So I've just worked locally with other community-based organizations to get their input and feedback exactly on how they feel about being represented and their representation. I'm hearing a lot of similar stories that we feel like either second fiddle, unheard, unseen, or used as a tool, used as leverage. So putting those together, and then also looking at election data and pulling the election data, both for the elections that most people know about, like the Assembly and the State Senate, but also those elections that a lot of people don't know about, like Delegate Assembly, and looking at whether you won election or you had to be appointed. And so that's one of the key pieces that is really relevant for me, because appointment is a tricky process, because you have to be running in those circles and have a good relationship with the elected official in order to get those appointments, or through your Democratic Party in order to get those appointments. So it takes a little bit of the democracy away from our city and those cities that are under this type of representation. It takes a little of your democracy away, because election isn't fair for you, and you have to really rely on that appointment process and not making those people angry, so that, or, you know, you're not in their favor, so you don't get those appointments.
So you're going to be consolidating all this input and sending it to the State Redistricting Commission?
Yes, and hopefully when they come here and they're having their, he said, you know, when they actually take open input that he can listen to, having people come present there and then sending things in, doing it both ways.
Okay. Yeah, because I think you can send information in right now.
Mm-hmm. But I've heard that in person is the best.
Oh,
way to
yeah,
go,
well,
which
you
I
need to
thought was-
definitely need to do both. Definitely need
Yeah.
to do both.
And the San Mateo County Office of Ed just said that they are going to looking at going to bi-district elections. So that's as you were talking about as part of the school board, that's going to be something that will also be really relevant. So, I mean, it's amazing how quickly right now San Mateo County is moving to bi-district elections, and even there's still some places that are not doing that. And actually Daly City, I don't know, is Daly City talking about going to bi-district elections?
For our school district?
No, for the city.
For this, no, not that I know of. I don't think any municipality right now is looking at district elections. I know for my school district, we haven't, one, we are a really diverse board, but two, I think it would make it so much harder to find someone who is willing to run in our area for school board. It's not a great job. And even, I know right now it's even harder to find someone who's willing to be on school board, but I would say that district elections in certain races really limits the pool of who would run. So I'm trying to be mindful of both. In areas where there's a lack of representation, then I would say absolutely. But I think if there's an area that has always had good representation, is it needed? Or does everyone have to do it?
Suzanne Moore has a question. Suzanne, do you want to just take yourself off mute and ask directly?
Hey, Kalimah, I was just wondering if you would mind making a list of the sources of the data you're using, because it might be beneficial to others who are considering doing community of interest, and they could benefit from the work you've done.
Sure. I'll pull everything that I pulled together. I'll make sure that Petra has it, and so she could share it out, and I'll share all the places where I was able to get data.
You are wonderful. Thanks, Kalimah.
Just on, so you know, on our website, in addition to the redistricting page, we also have a civic participation page. And on that page, there's links to a bunch of data that we've gotten from in our voting section on voting patterns. So there's a lot of information from the Center for Inclusive Democracy Dr. Mindy Romero, who's done a lot of work in San Mateo County. So it's just, it might be something that's useful if you want to look at kind of who's voting and by ethnicity or by age or anything like that.
I forgot about that, Petra. Thanks so much.
And we'll send a follow-up email to this, and we'll bother you hopefully not too often, but enough to keep you guys in the loop. Does anybody else have like areas in the county that they're concerned about or specific? I mean, you guys are all here for a reason. If anybody wants to share why you're here, where your focus is right now, I'd love to hear.
This is Karen again. Sorry for no camera, but I'm having bandwidth issues today. I'm interested in the County Board of Supervisor races, not just 22, but 24. And like you said, they're mostly turning out. And they're not very reflective of the community. And so I'm just wondering if anybody has a sense for, will the lines change dramatically, do we think, or is it just impossible to know?
So the demographers who did the presentation to the county, and by the way, on our redistricting page, there's the link to that, to what the demographers who are not Paul Mitchell, was another organization whose name I forget, that did a presentation to the county. And they said that they don't anticipate huge changes, but there was, what was it, maybe in the north and the south ends, there might be about 10% more. Is that what they said, Diane?
Something like, well, again, I think it's also the mix has changed. So there's some communities that are much larger in the north and the south than they were in 2010. So again, in terms of communities of interest, there may need to be some changes done to the district boundaries to ensure that those communities of interest are represented.
Pam?
Yes, and thank you. In the southern end of the county, it looks like it may be a 10%, and the difference may be that rather than Menlo Park being in two different districts, that it ends up being in one, and the little areas that were chopped out, pulled out on the for the board of supervisors, that will also be a part of the same district. And I think, Kalimah, did I see your name on doing the redistricting in 2013? Because I was looking at doing some research to see how we got to where we are today, because the lines are a little bit straight. And I do understand they were trying to keep North Fair Oaks, the Bellhaven neighborhood, and East Palo Alto in the same district. So there was a possibility of having someone that was more representative of the area, Redwood City included, would get elected in 2018 or 2014 and 2018. Unfortunately, people vote for the incumbent. So we ended up not having anybody new. And we know that has to change so that we have supervisors and that are representative of the people that they're supervising, because there tends to be a disconnect between the needs of the communities and what the supervisors decide is important. But anyway, that's my 12 cents.
Was anybody here part of the redistricting in 2013? Okay, David?
Thanks. I'm just sort of thinking out loud, spitballing here, but what I'm really concerned with in terms of the statewide redistricting in support of Daly City being in the same district as much of the rest of San Mateo County is that it would be used against us. Okay, you can either, we have to cut it off somewhere on one end or the other. So if it might be a dilemma of some kind that they try to put us in saying, okay, either we cut it off at Daly City, or we cut it off at like, where other, like East Palo Alto and other areas benefit less. But I think I answered my own question in that Mark Berman is representing much of that area. So I'm just, what have people told you in the past of if we put Daly City with much of the rest of San Mateo County, or where are they going to cut it like elsewhere? Are they going to put Portola Valley and Atherton in Mark Berman's area as well? Or what, has anyone said anything along those lines to you in the past, Kalimah?
No, I can't get us, no one's telling me anything right now because no one wants to say anything until they have the census data, as the gentleman that was here earlier. But again, if we look at Atherton, I mean, some of those communities already consider themselves more Silicon Valley than they do San Mateo County. So, I think there are ways that we can talk and negotiate. In looking at the numbers, once I get the hard numbers about where we can draw the lines and where we can maybe make splits. And I think the other part that's going to come into play is the number of senators, because the numbers changed here drastically before because we gained a senator. So, or assembly member, excuse me. So there was one assembly member, I think, that was like a lame duck because they had been drawn out of their seat, but they still held the seat until they redrew it. So those numbers are going to go down. So the shifting may happen again. So, there's a lot, I think, I think this is the best time to do it because there's so much in play that if we were going to do it, this is the time.
Yeah, I mean, because the county, we're already we have two separate congressional representatives in the county, and is it 3 for the assembly? Because we have Mark Berman.
Four, because we have Ting, we have
Mullen, and we have Berman. So we have 3.
Can I just reframe something? I don't think David meant to do it, but he sort of put the correction that Kalimah is seeking to obtain in opposition to sort of not upsetting the cart at the other end of the county. And I just want to reframe that as, well, that's interesting, but things are going to change for everybody. And it's very, very clear that Daly City needs to be part of San Mateo. Heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I didn't mean to, as I was saying, coming out of my mouth, I realized I was poorly framing it.
As I said, I didn't think that you wanted to. I just wanted to be clear because I think it's important.
Yeah,
it just
for
sort of
those of us who have
raises.
Go ahead, Diane.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, for those of us who lived in San Mateo County, I mean, we've gone back and forth between Anna Eshoo and Jackie Spear multiple times, and I can never remember. It's like, who's my congressperson?
Hector Camacho, you were raising your hand before. Do you want to chime in?
Sure. I'm Hector Camacho. I'm on the San Mateo County Board of Ed. And as expected, Kalimah said exactly what was on my mind. Now, it was this idea of when David was talking about what happens, what's a potential outcome of if Daly City is incorporated in a new district. I just, having worked in North Fair Oaks, Bellhaven, and these Palo Alto communities, I'm really interested in this concept of, yes, Portola Valley, Woodside, Atherton live in a very different space than most of San Mateo County. And are their interests represented elsewhere? Possibly. But I think those are questions that we should ask if we're talking about really creating representation that reflects the what this county looks like, because we know it doesn't right now. You know, Gene Mullen, who's an incredible mentor of mine, he told me when Kevin was first elected, he said, my son will be the last white guy to represent this area in the assembly. And I want to believe that's true for many reasons, but like, is it true? I don't know. And what are we doing about that? Not because it has to be a person of color, but because it has to be an option for a person of color. And I think that has to be part of the conversation. Thank you for calling out that the county office is transitioning. We had started that conversation a while back, and we are looking for this new census data. We were waiting for the 2020 census data to start those steps. Our board is interesting, and it's not impacted by the redistricting because, or it won't change the fact that we're redistricting, but our board, I think the California Voting Rights Act also kind of treats all boards in a way that doesn't recognize their different functions. Our board we do not control local schools. We are an appellate board. And when you have to do district boundaries for an appeals board, how does that affect our ability to stay neutral in these appeals decisions when now, you know, I better be voting in favor of the appeal of my district as opposed to what is in the interest of the child and what do we understand about the county in making those decisions. So I just threw that out there. If we're welcome all of you to come join us for our public hearings. We meet the first and third Wednesdays of each month, and those will be our public hearings for redistricting.
And just to piggyback on that really quick in terms of school boards, I mean, that's to me is another excellent point. And one of the things, we live in such segregated societies here in the county, and that in my school district, I have my area that is my working class folks that are largely Daly City, and then Pacifica and Brisbane, completely different parents and completely different students. And it's much easier for me to advocate for equity and a whole child as a whole, because I'm not tied to a specific set of voters. The debate between return to school pit community against community. And if we were district, you would have to vote one way I would know which way that board member would vote, because their community was tied to that vote. Whereas another community was specifically tied to another way, and we can't do that. And so when we're talking about moving forward in an equitable way and pushing through, I think making a board go to a district elections really hurts us in making a decision that's not driven by a certain group of parents of privilege who have access and a lot of means to control their board member versus another community. So that's my other pushback against district elections, and especially for my school district, is that it really frees us up to do the equity work, because we can think about the whole child and not worry about having to upset a certain community where they feel like things are being taken away when really we're just making things equitable.
So on that note, with Kalimah basically telling us this is complicated. I want to thank you, Kalimah, for sharing. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. And I'd love to hear back from you what you think Thrive should do next, because we're happy to bring everyone together for conversations like this. I think it's really important. We really see our role as educating people so that we can get that representation that Hector was talking about. Like we want to see that. We think that's good for the county. What can we do to help? So let us know, and we'll continue to keep the conversation going. We're going to be tracking as much as we can on our website and sending out emails, and we will be probably having, you know, in a month we'll have something else with updates and whatever seems most relevant at the time, because this is something that's constantly evolving. So we appreciate everyone coming, and we will see you all soon. Have a good evening. Oh, thanks, Pam. You want to say something quickly?
Yes, real quick. I know what we can do with Thrive is invest in one of those mapping tools so people can do mapping and get familiar with it, so it's not a scary thing to do. And when there's their district or their community is doing mapping, they will be more likely to be engaged. Just a thought.
Well, we can get a train the trainer. Asians American Advance and Justice said they'd already teach us how to do that. So do you want us to do that next? Okay, Sarah, you
Yes,
heard
yes,
that?
yes, yes.
Okay, next is mapping then. Thanks, Pam.
And thank you.
See y'all soon, I'm sure.